Well, hello, Jasper. This is My name is Kip Mars. I'm the founder, co-founder, and CEO of Western Alaska Minerals. So I'll give you a quick overview of the company. We started, my wife Jonah and I founded the company in 2010 as we started working in the Illinois Creek Mining District in Western Alaska. And I would like to point out all the discoveries we'll talk about today. All the deposits were originally discovered by Anaconda Minerals Company in the 1980s, and I was fortunate enough to be the first project geologist to run this. So we'll go ahead and start through this for a minute in the next minute, but I would like to turn it over to Peter Megaw to introduce himself also, be joining us today.
God dag till allihopa. Jag är Peter Megaw. Hej och I did speak a little Swedish once upon a time in my life. I have been working now with Jasper for quite a while, most recently with Western Alaska, which is a lot of fun. I'm best known for working on carbonate replacement deposits in Mexico, the western U.S., and thanks to working with Kit at Illinois Creek, now I'm working to help them with the CRD system here in Western Alaska Minerals. So it's a lot of fun to be working on this project. It's got some real potential, and it's a real pleasure to be here with you all today talking about this project.
Thank you, Peter. I'll go ahead and run through some of the slides. First of all, I'd just like to talk to this one briefly. This gives you a view of what our project looks like. We are in Western Alaska, very low rolling hills. We are not in the glaciated Alaska range. So once you find something, it's a very easy place to work. You see the airstrip in the upper left. That is how we bring in people and supplies and equipment for the exploration. The camp in the lower right was originally built in the mid-1990s when the Illinois Creek mine went in production. And this was the first open pit heap leach mine in Alaska. So we have a lot of infrastructure for a exploration project, very different, probably about 15 miles of roads that we build and maintain, and that supports our drilling program. I'll quickly go through the forward-looking statement. I think everybody has seen these before, and let you read this at your leisure. So I would like to stop here in this slide and just talk about some of the major aspects of Western Alaska Minerals. So as the first bullet point there, we really have two assets, two resources right now. This is all part of one large geologic carbonate replacement deposit system that Peter will expand on a little bit later. So on the west end of the district, we have the past producing Illinois Creek mine. The current resource there is a very nice gold and silver. There is copper in it, but we cannot include that in our resource yet. We're working on the metallurgy. And that's about 525,000 ounces of gold equivalent, or as you see here, 373,000 ounces of gold and 150 million ounces of silver equivalent, of gold equivalent from silver. So it's a very good grade. On the far northeast end of the system, about 8 kilometers away, is the Waterpump Creek deposit. That is our extremely high-grade polymetallic Silver-Lead-Zinc deposit, 75 million ounces at a very, very high grade, just under a kilo of silver equivalent. We are in Alaska. It's a very mining-friendly state. We are all on state of Alaska land, all our properties, road, and access, so that's very important from a permitting standpoint. Our team, besides Peter, includes Joe Pekenbrock, who was past VP of Exploration for Nova Gold and was responsible for the enlargement of the Donlin project from $1 million ounces of gold to its current 28 million, 30 million ounces. Joe also worked in the Brooks Range on the Bornite deposit, now part of Ambler Metals. And I was on the early discovery team for Greens Creek back in the 1970s. We'll touch quickly on a few other items. We do have a very good community relations effort that we started in 2017. We have a very strong local hire program that includes training of our local hires from the neighboring Alaska Native villages. We are working towards de-risking for future development, and that includes a all-weather access road that has been designed and engineered to connect our project with the Yukon River. And we'll touch also, we have a very clean and tight capital structure. This gives you an idea. It's a satellite view. We'll turn this over to Peter in a second here to talk about some of the geology, but I'd like to point out on the far left side, that would be the past producing Illinois Creek mine. There's a photo from the 1990s that gentleman from village of Caltag, that's our closest village, who worked here on the site, and that's him in the gold room during the production at Illinois Creek. We see the airstrip in the center. That's also very close to one of our CRD targets, the LH target, and then the far right would be Waterpump Creek, and that is really our flagship high-grade resource. This might be a good time to turn it over to Peter and let him talk about the view and how this system really is developing.
Happy to take over briefly here anyway, but one of the fundamental aspects of carbonate replacement deposits is that they are zoned with respect to a heat source. That would be a magma body, an intrusive hot molten rock rises to relatively shallow levels in the crust, and then the fluids move away from that along a series of interconnected fractures. So that's the plumbing of the system. And different metals drop out sequentially along that pathway. So near the intrusion, that's where typically your copper and your gold drop out. Then it transitions into zinc, and then it transitions into zinc, lead, silver. And we see that transition, or at least we see three pieces of that transition, with the gold and copper with some silver at the historic Illinois Creek mine. We see zinc in the middle at Warm Springs and in the LH target, and then we see the high-grade silver-lead-zinc mineralization out at Waterpump Creek. So we have three pieces along this continuum. There's some post-mineral faulting that's chopped the system up a little bit, and we're working on how you jump from one side of the fault to the next. But fundamentally, these things all would have been connected at the time of mineralization, so it's just our job now to find the individual pieces so that they can be mined as a series of components of what was a historically or prehistorically a connected system. Somewhere in the area of the Illinois Creek open pit mine is probably where the intrusive that drove the system lies. We are working on trying to find that. And another thing to remember about these deposits is that that intrusive is essentially the hub or the center of the system, and it can have a whole series of spokes around it, like the spokes of an old wheel. And so this is not necessarily the only spoke in this system. So there's potential for upside, not just in connecting the dots here in the portion of the district that's seen work historically, but elsewhere in the property package. And it's worth mentioning that the property package is large enough that those spokes can go in pretty much any direction, and Western Alaska will control the property.
Okay, well, thank you, Peter. So we'll go through a few of the close-up images. This again is depicting the system that Peter just outlined. Again, the Illinois Creek mine in the left-hand side or the western side of this view. All the little black dots represent the historical drilling. All that is, almost all of it was during the 1990s. Our resource is what was left over was not mined. Only about 15% of the deposit was mined, and that's because they opened during a period of extremely low gold prices, where gold went below $300 US dollars an ounce, and the mine was only open for about 18 months. So it's still a very good resource, and with the run up in gold and silver prices in the last few months, we are considering to take a look at that resource again and probably remodel it using higher gold prices. It was currently, the resource is based on $20 silver and $1,600 gold. The yellow and tan colors are depicting two different types of geophysical anomalies. One is in the center, was done in 2022, and the other is a three-dimensional induced polarization study done in 2023. The main point, these depict the extent and the size of the alteration that accompanied the mineralization of the carbonate replacement system. Up in the upper right, again, is the Waterpump Creek deposit. It shows the size of it, and the adjacent area to the north of it is the original oxide discovery that Anaconda made in 1984. So this again gives you the scale of the deposit, and I'm looking for the scale bar on the right. There's a 6-kilometer vertical scale, and it's about 8 kilometers east-west. The targets in 2025, we will be talking a little bit more on the Warm Springs discovery that we made this year in 2024. That's right in the center of the image. We have a number of good intercepts of high-grade gold, silver, and also a continuation of some lead, zinc, silver. Though we only have about 6 or 7 holes in this area, and that is something we'll be focusing on next year and drilling in 2025. In addition, this image depicts the upper right. Waterpump Creek is still open to the north along the Illinois Creek structure. That area has not yet been tested, and so that is also an excellent target of the future. And then a lot of other targets in the center connecting the dots between Waterpump Creek and Illinois Creek. This is actually based on some work that Peter has done at Santa Eulalia, a very famous deposit in Chihuahua on the far right. And the purpose of this slide is to show the scale of Santa Eulalia, Thinkin, Utah, and our Illinois Creek district. These 3 maps are all at the same scale, and again shows you the immense size and potential of the Illinois Creek district, and also shows some of the post-mineral faulting that makes exploration a little more difficult, but we're coming to terms with that as we continue to study. Peter, maybe I'll ask you just to comment quickly on your hub and spoke model, and since we have Santa Eulalia up.
Well, as you can see from Santa Eulalia, that is a plan map of the district, and there's something very similar that you see at Thinkin, where you have a whole series of parallel trends of mineralization. What you don't see in plan is that where everything coalesces just to the left, where the word spokes is there on Santa Eulalia, that's a series of vertical chimney bodies. So instead of being these long linguine-like deposits, which is what you see in plan, these are chimneys, and some of the biggest chimneys in that part of the district are 150 meters in diameter and up to 750 meters tall. And that would have been solid, massive sulfide mineralization. So when you get into the proximal zone of one of these systems, mineralization can get very large and very high grade. And it's the same sort of thing. The way to compare these two is think of the Illinois Creek system that we're looking at as having initially one spoke, and then with the work that we did this year at the Warm Springs target, we think we're found the beginning of a second spoke. So put yourself in the position where 2 of those spokes come together, like on the left-hand side of the Thinkin diagram, right above where it says copper and gold proximal. That's basically what we think is happening with those two spokes coming together back towards a source somewhere just on the left-hand side of that diagram.
Thank you, Peter. I'd like to touch on this slide and give you a 3-dimensional look at the Waterpump Creek resource. And that is the sulfide resource is on the right, and that's shown in the dark red. On the upper left-hand side above that is sort of a mustard-colored area. That would actually represent the original discovery, and that is oxide mineralization. We separate these 2 because they would have very different metallurgical recovery processes. The sulfide is a much simpler, uses flotation of the zinc mineral, which is fowlerite, and the lead mineral, which is galena. All the silver reports to the galena. So this deposit ultimately would produce two concentrates that would be shipped, a lead concentrate and a zinc concentrate. The oxide is still very important. It's very high grade. We don't have metallurgy on this. All the drilling in the oxide was done by Anaconda in the 1980s, and then Nova Gold for 1 or 2 years, 2005, 2006. We plan to do some metallurgical testing there in the future. That really is funding dependent. I would like to just direct you to the table there that actually has the average grade in the contained metal. So this is approximately 2.4 million tons. Very, very high grade. This is a high density material. It's a specific gravity of just a little less than 4, and it's would be amenable to bulk underground mining techniques. The top of the mineralization is about 100 meters below the surface, and the bottom right there is a little over 300 meters. This would be a very easily to engineer, design underground mine, and would use some very modern mining techniques, different than a typical vein deposit such as those in Mexico, which are long planar type zones of mineralization. This is much more bulky and condensed. The grade, as we mentioned, is very good grade. There's about 21 million ounces of silver, 590 million pounds of zinc, and a little over 500 million pounds of lead. So when you put those all together, that is where we get the silver equivalent of 980 grams per ton. I know silver, Peter prefers just to talk about the silver grade, so that's why we list both. Many analysts like to compare different deposits, and so that's really the reason we use the silver equivalent. This slide is really showing that the Waterpump Creek deposit is extremely high grade, and comparing with many other deposits, silver and polymetallic deposits throughout Western Hemisphere. We are polymetallic, and many of these are mainly gold and silver, so there's a little bit of differences there. I just want to point out, but it does show that we have an extremely high grade. Zinc is currently, both zinc and gallium are on the fairly new U.S. critical minerals list that's been widely discussed in the last couple of years. Zinc is used for galvanization, batteries, and many other items. Gallium is not very well known. It's a fairly rare mineral. It is actually number 1 on the critical mineral list, and the gallium is contained within the zinc mineral sphalerite. So we have an application in. Hopefully we'll be able to get some grant money from the U.S. Department of Defense to take a look at recovery of gallium from sphalerite, because it's a very little known process. But this is important for future permitting, that we have 2 minerals that are on the critical minerals list. This slide shows our current capital structure. I'd like to point out in the upper left, the 41.9 million shares. Those would be the free trading shares. As I mentioned, that original predecessor company, Western Alaska Copper and Gold, was incorporated in 2010. We operated and raised money as a private company for about 11 years. And most of those are U.S. shareholders and founder shareholders, such as myself, my wife Joan, Joe Pekenbrock, and a few others. The 22.5 million shares, those are not free trading and really represent our insider and founder shares. On the right, you see that the split between institutional and directors shows some very tight insider holdings of 32%, institutional ownership of 26%. A couple of our well-known shareholders are shown down below: Sprott Global Resource in the U.S., Commodity Discovery Fund in Netherlands, Crescat Capital is our largest shareholder based in Denver, Colorado, and a very early shareholder, Delbrook Capital, based in Vancouver. We have analyst coverage from Michael Gray at Agentis, Mike Niehauser at Roth Capital US and Roth Capital Canada. And so the last point I'd like to make for calculations of market cap I would recommend you combine the first two numbers, the 41.9 million and the 22.5. So we have a little over 64 million shares issued and outstanding, and that would be the best number to use. We do have warrants that were issued, two different tranches, some in 2023. Those were at a much higher price of $3.10. And then earlier this year in March and April, we had a financing and issued warrants at about 90 cents a share. Each of those are 3-year warrants. Touch here on the team and our leadership. I mentioned myself earlier. Joe Pekenbrock, again, is a very well-known explorer, has received two very well-known international awards from both the Association for Mineral Exploration in Vancouver and also the Colin Spence Award, which comes from PDAC. Darren Morgans is our CFO, joined us this year, has extensive experience both in Canada and with U.S. companies, and is actually originally from Australia. Spent a few years working in the UK, and now is in Halifax, Canada. Our VP of Exploration, Andy West, has about 25 years experience in Alaska, about a decade working with Hecla at the Greens Creek mine in Alaska, and then later with the Ambler Metals project in the Brooks Range of northern Alaska. A lot of experience in resource estimation, and Andy will be working on our two resources to upgrade those in the future. Peter introduced himself a little earlier today, and also we have another technical advisor, Darwin Green, the past CEO of High Gold Mining. Again, many years of Alaska experience. So we have well over 100 years of Alaska exploration experience with this combined team. So it's very unusual to have that amount of experience in a junior company, and something we're very proud of. This gives you an overview of the state of Alaska and some of the more important and well-known operating mines. Where Illinois Creek is shown right there in the left center in western Alaska. To the north is Red Dog. That is the operated by Teck Alaska, and that is, I believe, the second largest zinc producer in the world. It's been in operation for over 30 years, extremely profitable operation for Teck. To the in the center of the state, near Fairbanks, is the Fort Knox open pit gold mine that is operated by Kinross Alaska. Produces a little over 350,000 ounces of gold per year from an open pit operation. South of Fairbanks is Pogo. It's a very high-grade underground gold mine operated by Northern Star Resources out of Perth, and that produces about 250,000 ounces a year from underground. I mentioned Donlin. That is the largest undeveloped gold resource in North America and maybe the Western Hemisphere. That is a Barrick Nova Gold joint venture. It's fully permitted, and with current gold prices, would hope to hear some type of development announcement from the Donlin Group. Also shown on this in blue is the Yukon River. That we'll touch on that in the next slide, and that is really the marine access that we would have to deep water ports. Our properties are shown here in blue, a very large position of over 73,000 U.S. acres, which would be equivalent to 29,500 hectares. All these properties are 100% owned by Western Alaska Minerals. We have no third-party underlying royalties. All these are state of Alaska mining claims. The only property payment is an annual claim rental to the state of Alaska that is a flat rate for all mineral properties in the state. I would like to point out the thin red line that connects the Illinois Creek mine west to the Yukon River. That represents a winter road that has been used for the last 40 years to bring in heavy equipment on a winter trail. We have completed a 3-year civil engineering study along that route to design a all-weather access that would be needed to transport the lead and zinc concentrates from Waterpump Creek. The Yukon River, shown there on the left, that is a major river system. It's over a mile or approximately 2 kilometers wide at that point, and over 40 feet in depth. So it's a very substantial river. We can bring deep water ocean going barge to that site. I'd like to talk a little bit about our social license. We've worked very closely with the Alaska Native population. There are 4 different villages in our general area all along the Yukon River. We've had a very strong local hire program since 2017. This year, we've had over 15 different individuals from the 3 of the 4 villages that have been working on our site, and a very, very successful program. We're very proud of that. Each year, we visit the tribal councils in each village and give a presentation to them. Then we also offer on-site visits. This year we had visits from 3 of the villages where people can come out, see our operation firsthand, meet the people on site, and also very importantly, see their friends and neighbors that are working for us. And it's been a very successful partnership. Talking briefly here about our activities in 2024, the left-hand side would show some of the 2024 drilling at the Warm Springs target. Again, you can see the area is very covered in forest, so geology is very difficult. It is really a drill-intensive project. Soil sampling is used extensively, and geophysics. We did some trenching this year along the LH zone in order to determine the structure, shown in the center photo, and you can see the proximity to our airstrip that's there. Lower left photo is a photo of some of our neighbors from the village of Nulato. It's another one that we have a very large local hire presence, and in the core shed, understanding and taking a look at what we actually do with the drilling. In 2024, we completed 4,230 meters of drilling. Our planned budget was about 4,000 meters. We came in slightly under budget from a cost standpoint, and so we were able to increase that. That includes 9 holes at the Warm Springs target. 7 of those 9 holes had extensive alteration and mineralization, and so we count Warm Springs as a new discovery. The drilling was the first ever at Warm Springs. We're very excited about that, and we're currently working on a 3-dimensional model, and this will be one of the main focuses for exploration next year. The LH target is the one that's very adjacent to the airstrip. Completed 4 holes. It has some historical mineralization from the Nova Gold program, and we're still working on refining that model. It appears now that the mineralization is more vertical than horizontal, such as at Waterpump Creek, but we hope to have another planned drilling program there in the future next year. This shows a close-up of in the lower right-hand corner, that would be the past-producing Illinois Creek mine. It is fully reclaimed by the state of Alaska. Very important, this shows you can have a fully permitted, fully operational open pit mine at our location in Alaska. So it's really a brownfield site from that standpoint. 2 other properties we have, we're not actively exploring. Round Top, which is a copper porphyry about 12 miles to the northeast of Waterpump Creek. And then due north about 6 miles is Honker, which is a very high-grade, low sulfidation vein system. Ultimately, those projects will be explored more, but our focus is really on the very high-grade Waterpump Creek system that we've talked about earlier. And so to finish up, this just gives you another aerial view. The Warm Springs drilling would be just above the white lettering there. It's about 1.5 kilometers to the east of the past producing pit. It shows the excellent reclamation that was done here, and then 8 kilometers along strike of the Illinois Creek mine, we see the Waterpump Creek location, and that is also the approximate location of our camp. So I'll go ahead and stop here and turn it over to Jasper again. Would like to point out in the appendix we have the complete resource tables for both Illinois Creek and for Waterpump Creek.
So, both of you gentlemen, could you tell us about yourself and give us some more color on your career?
Well, mine's a little shorter than Peter's, so I'll start with mine. So, but both Peter and I know each other from originally University of Arizona. We're both graduates of the excellent geosciences program there. So I have a degree in economic geology and with a focus also on structural geology. And it was a very great place to go to school. Some of the pioneers and giants of economic geology, such as John Gilbert and Spence Titley, were professors there. That's when I had the opportunity to work in Mexico, actually, for Anaconda Peñoles joint venture. And that one of the very fortuitous things that just happens in one's career. Gave a field trip to some anaconda geologists from all over the world, introduced myself to them. I had some prior experience in Alaska, and as a result, was offered a job to move to Alaska and spend over a decade with Anaconda. And that was really one of the highlights of my career, and that introduced me to the Illinois Creek deposit in 1981. After Anaconda closed, the Illinois Creek deposit reverted to a joint venture partner, one of the Alaska Native corporations. It went into production, as I mentioned. And then full circle came about in 2008 after the mine was reclaimed. Went back into the public domain, as it's called. All the claims and leases were released, and that gave my wife Joan and I opportunity to start reacquiring the district and put it back together with our friend and partner Joe Pekenbrock. So that's how we got to where we are now. My professional work was mainly in Arizona, northern Mexico, and then principally in Alaska, and then have a number of other interests. We're based in Tucson, our business office, Tucson, Arizona in the wintertime, and then move our operations to Alaska in the summertime and have a very hands-on management of the program. And it's a very enjoyable project. Exploration is a wonderful business. It's very exciting, especially when you find something. And Peter came out to give a short course to our team in 2021, just as we drilled our first really sulfide hit at Waterpump Creek. So at that point, I'll stop and turn it over to Peter.
Well, I'm not sure my career is any longer than Kit's, but we've both been at it for quite a while. I come out of a background in volcanology and sedimentary geology from the University of Texas at Austin. Started working in Mexico in the late 70s. There was a downturn in the business. I went to the University of Arizona for my doctorate, which is where I crossed paths initially with Kit. And then a few years later, we now live about 3 blocks away from each other. So we're neighbors as well as colleagues. I started working in Mexico on carbonate replacement deposits, which are responsible for about 40% of Mexico's historic silver production. I've done a lot of work on epithermal veins, which is where the bulk of Mexico's silver production has come from. So I've been a silver geologist for more than 40 years, focused on carbonate replacement deposits, which nobody really cared about until 2018 when South 32 paid $1.3 billion for the Taylor project in Watt, Arizona mining. That's also practically a neighbor of Kit's and mine. We could see it just to the south of us here. And that really changed people's perspective on carbonate replacement deposits. They realized, wait a minute, these are very large, they're very high grade, they're metallurgically docile, so you can get the values out. You typically mine them underground so that they have a minimal environmental footprint. All of these are very important components in today's world. And then what we've seen over the last few years is a dramatic increase in the price of the metals involved in these deposits. First, the silver and the zinc, and now, as Kit mentioned, a number of the critical metals in addition to zinc that come along with these deposits. Gallium, indium, for example, tin, tungsten, a number of other metals, which radically changes the permitting environment. So I've been very fortunate over the course of my career to make two or three major discoveries in Mexico, two of them carbonate replacement systems, one of them potentially the biggest one ever found in Mexico, and also was intimately involved with the discovery of the Juanicipio veins in Zacatecas in the Fresnillo district, the world's largest single silver producer. And so we now have that mine up and running through Mag Silver, which I co-founded back in 2001. And it's on track to produce about 20 million ounces of silver this year. So I had actually never set foot in Alaska until Kit initially invited me to come up and take a look at Illinois Creek, and I was knocked out by what I saw. It was the sorts of things I'm used to seeing in Mexico, which is where the world's biggest known CRD systems are. To see that in Alaska and to see it emerge over the last 4 or 5 years as an increasingly clearly a large integrated system has been a real eye-opener for me. And it's opening up new territory, not just for me, but for Western Alaska Minerals, but also for the state of Alaska and the people who live in this neighborhood.
You both have had impressive careers. Would you like to mention a few things that you're particularly proud of?
Well, the thing I'm proudest of is the discovery of Juanicipio in the Fresnillo district, which is now one of the world's largest primary silver mines. After that would be the discovery of Cinco de Mayo in Chihuahua, which is an enormous carbonate replacement system, which we found basically after 20 years of research understanding the belt of CRDs in Mexico and realizing that they had a certain spacing along this belt for giant deposits, and there was a gap in Chihuahua that said, gee, there ought to be one in here somewhere. And we went up and saw in an area that is largely covered, we saw a few important signs that there was something big nearby. And ultimately, we were able to make the Cinco de Mayo discovery, which is a completely blind discovery. It has almost no surface expression at all. In many ways, that makes it very similar to Illinois Creek, because as Kit pointed out, you have all the vegetation that covers things. The discoveries that were made initially by Anaconda were made by prospectors, essentially, and then digging pits around what was originally very small outcrop discoveries. And then these things have grown from that into a large system. And it's that kind of recognition that you can go back into a historic district. In some cases in Mexico, or just Fresnillo obviously is one of the world's biggest, if not the biggest, silver camp in the world. But Cinco de Mayo had small scale prospecting around it, but nobody had ever put the pieces together because they didn't have the modern understanding of how these deposits work. So those kinds of experiences in Mexico translate very nicely into the largely covered part of Alaska where Western Alaska is working. And that's what lets me say, okay, you found this much of the system. Illinois Creek was found, it was mined. There were some oxide holes at Waterpump Creek. We found the sulfide ore body at Waterpump Creek. And I'm using the word we because I was there when the first hole came out, but I had nothing to do with determining where that hole went in. But I have a great picture of Sage, who was one of the project chief geologists, sitting there holding this core, absolutely excited about finding it. But the point is that I can look at a district like that and I can say, this looks like other big CRDs that I've looked at elsewhere in the world. You've got a nice spoke, but think bigger. This system may have multiple spokes to it. The Warm Springs looks like another spoke that we've added to it. But just as a clock has 360 degrees, we've only explored from about 2 to 4 o'clock on the clock at Illinois Creek. So there's a lot of room left to go.
I was fascinated listening. I always like to hear Peter's history, and maybe he didn't pick the drill site for our 2109 drill hole, but he certainly knew how to explain to everybody what it meant and the significance. So that was a great, one of those great timing that just a coincidence happened. We did a lot of work to put it together, but it still happened great. my early days, I mentioned Greens Creek. As a young geologist, that was was a great highlight. We were doing stream sediment geochemistry, helicopter supported, in the really mountainous terrain of southeast Alaska on Admiralty Island, and there was what is now the Greens Creek massive sulfide zone weathering on the surface, and you get out and step in that in your rubber boots, and we collected the red mud that stuck to your boots, and it was about 10% combined lead zinc and 10 ounces silver, and so it was clearly that was a major discovery. And our team, I wasn't the one that picked the drill hole, but our team drilled the discovery drill hole there. Anaconda, when I was with them a little later, actually took control of the deposit along with Miranda. And just like to comment that it went in production with about 3 million tons. Waterpump Creek is currently 2.4 million tons. In today's modern environment of finance, et cetera, is very difficult and rarely done for a junior company to be able to make a decision to go ahead. But in those days, Anaconda and Miranda had some excellent geologic teams, and they knew that the potential was much bigger than that, and were able to go into production. And since then, I think it's produced well over 20 million tons and has an existing resource of another 12 or 15 left. Later, with Anaconda, had the opportunity to run the Ambler District project for several years. That was a very exciting time during a lot of the changes in mineral exploration, mineral ownership in Alaska, the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. We gave tours to committees from the U.S. Congress that were in the process of setting the legislation that created many of the land holdings that we know today. So that was very exciting. But currently, as Peter mentioned, being able to go back into a district when we were originally at Illinois Creek in the 1980s, we knew that had the potential to be big. But then after Anaconda closed, the ownership changed. Everything sort of lay fallow for probably 20 years. And so I think very proud of the fact that we've been able to come back in, pick up the pieces. A lot of the historical work took years for us to digitize all the hand-drawn work. This was pre-computer, which is, I guess, shows how old we are. But now able, with Peter's help, Sage Langton Stewart, our young geologist, very successful putting the story back together. So very proud of what we've been able to accomplish in the last 4 or 5 years at the Illinois Creek District.
Could you tell me how large your equity stake is in Western Alaska, and also how important it is to your net worth?
It's as I mentioned, Joan and I co-founded the company, so we started with 100% ownership back in 2010. So we certainly understand how you grow the company through bringing in partners and other investors. So currently we have about under 20, about 18% combined between Joan and I, 9% each. So we are large shareholders. It is significant, but I wouldn't say it's anywhere near our largest financial holding, and we really look upon those shares. They're restricted shares. We're co-founders and management, so it's not something that we look at on a day-to-day basis. It's a long-term holding, and ultimately, as we expand the different discoveries we've made, ultimately we hope to de-risk the project and turn it over to a large or mid-tier operating company, and at that point realize whatever shareholder value we can create along with all of our other shareholders. So that's our plan. And you also had asked a little bit about the history. I don't want to repeat some things I already stated a little bit of it, but it was it's a long history with the company, and I think some of that's already been covered. If you have any other questions, Jasper.
Peter, you're an advisor, but I assume you have some shares and some options.
Yes, I do. I invested in the company when it was still private, so I have these compressed shares that I don't completely understand that expand as they become free trading. This has to do with the company originally being a private company in the U.S. and then ultimately becoming listed in Canada. And those shares peel out periodically. I have no idea what that means my holding of Western Alaska is. I won't say it's significant, but it's not insignificant either. To me, the potential of this property and the potential of being involved in what I think could be a major discovery is what matters to me at this point in life. I mean, money's nice, but I'm not. I don't need whatever the financial reward of Western Alaska would be for me, but to be involved in an exploration success in a new area to essentially create a new CRD belt, that would be worth much more than the financial stake. So I have, I would say, reputational investment in the company that far exceeds my financial benefit.
Could you just quickly tell me what's the current cash position like, working capital? Do you have any debt?
Our latest financials, we do audited financials actually and reviewed every quarter because we have a shelf prospectus on file, and that's one of the requirements. So June 30th, our cash position was about 5 million Canadian. We then, of course, had 2 months of full exploration and drilling program. We'll be releasing our third quarter financials in another 45 to 60 days. But the best way to look at it is we had approximately 5 million in the bank on June 30th, and we explored for a couple months there, and it's about $1 million a month when you're going full blast with all the crews and drilling, etc. So we hope to finish the year with cash in the bank, and we're very confident that we'll be having an excellent program next year.
What's the quarterly G&A burn rate? Exclude any exploration activities.
When we're not exploring, then our burn rate drops very, very quickly. We have a small permanent staff, so it's in the neighborhood of approximately $100,000 per month. And that would include our land payment to the state of Alaska for all 73,000 acres. It's about $140,000 to $150,000 US, and that's the only land payment that we need to make. There is a moderate amount of debt on the books, probably about $2 million, and that is insider payment to Joe Pekenbrock when we combined all the properties. So he combined his properties with ours, and as a result, received shares and cash payments, and that's going through out into late 2025. So that's something that it is technically debt on the books, but to one of our insiders in the company.
What are the expiry dates on the 15.2 million warrants?
The warrants were 3 years each. So the first tranche was in March of 2023. So they would expire in 2026, and that was the ones that were at I think $3.12. And then this year we issued warrants at 90 cents a share, and 3 years from going forward from April of 2024. So those would expire in 2027. And some of those have been exercised a small amount. Whenever we trade over about $1 a share, then the company does receive income as those warrants are exercised.
And what's the all-in drilling cost per meter? And I know this varies depending on the size of the program, but say that you do a 4,000 to 6,000 meter diamond drill program over the summer.
We break that into two components. One is the direct drilling, and that would be anything that's really paid to our drilling contractor and supplies and things that go directly into the drilling. And that's around $210 per meter. And so that would be, our operation is in US, so that's a good question, since we operate as a US, under our US subsidiary. And then you add to that all the camp all-in costs, all the geologists, transportation, everything else that supports the project. It's a little hard to break the drilling directly out of that because we do so many other things each summer. But you need to add in probably another $250 to $300 per meter all in. Once you expand the program, I should point out, we own our own drilling equipment. If you don't, then you have to fly it in each year and fly it out so the drill contractor can use it somewhere else. So we found it financially beneficial to the company. We used some of the capital that we raised in 2022 and 2023 to buy brand new drill rigs. They're on site. We maintain our own equipment. They're in excellent shape, and one drill is actually sitting on the Warm Springs target. So we can start up, gives us about a 48-hour startup period in the spring. So it's very, very helpful from that, but it does lower our drilling costs. If you double the size of the program, we could easily go from 4,000 meters to 6,000 to 8,000. That would lower our cost per foot substantially because the rest of the costs are fixed. We're running the camp. If we only have to add 4 more drillers for one drill, it doesn't increase the cost that much.
I would like to move on to infrastructure. You already mentioned that, talked about the access road, but yeah, how is it with access to water and also power?
Water would not be an issue. In Alaska, there's where the water table is in some areas is probably about 20 feet down. So we have done a number of drilling, and when the mine wasn't, remember Illinois Creek was an operating heap leach open pit, and so we do have all the hydrogeology reports, so water was not an issue. So unlike the Atacama Desert in Chile, where the number one issue is water, not the case here. The access road is about 28 U.S. miles, a little over 40 kilometers. Fairly straightforward road designed to be in the uplands. There's one bridge crossing and one small little called a river ferry crossing where it's more economical to have a little ferry boat and not build a bridge. That would be required for shipment of the concentrate. So that would be a key component for shipment of concentrate and also to lower your operating costs by bringing supplies in via deepwater barge out of either Anchorage or the Seattle Pacific Northwest. Power is different. That is one of the questions that most of the projects in Alaska that are looking at that are not on the rail belt hydroelectric system, which is quite limited in Alaska, unlike BC. So right now, historically, these were probably diesel operated, but there's a lot of work going on now, and most likely a modern deposit would be some type of liquefied natural gas that would be stored on site and then run a LNG generator system. So that's most likely, but we haven't got into the design of that.
Let's actually speak about the geology. How many mineralizing events do you think the Illinois Creek has been subject to?
Sure. I mean, I'll start on a very large scale. Illinois Creek, in the large sense, sits in a major structural belt. So this is a fold thrust belt that was active, prior probably to the emplacement of the Pluton that Kit mentioned. And typically what we see worldwide is that these tectonic belts, which basically reflect continents colliding with each other at some point in the past, that those belts tend to reflect deep penetrating structures along which mineralizing events occur repeatedly over long periods of geologic time because they're zones of weakness in the crust, so they're easy places for these magma bodies to rise to shallow level in the crust and over a long period of time and create mineralization. So it's not surprising. It's actually very encouraging to see both 113 and 70 million year mineralization occurring basically in the same area because it's telling you something about that deep basement control, which is important for major ore districts. To get into the details of the Illinois Creek system itself, carbonate replacement deposits and the porphyries that they're related to are multi-stage systems. So even though it's a single mineralizing system in the broad sense, there are pulses within that, some stronger than others, some weaker than others, that are emplaced sequentially over 1,000,000 or 2,000,000 years of time. So they look like they're different stages, but they're actually related to the same fundamental magmatic source. As the magma cools, it expels fluids at different times, so it's evolving. The composition of the fluids that are expelled evolve, and as those are squirted out into the system, that's what gives you the different stages of mineralization that you see. So looking at just Illinois Creek, what you want to see as you're exploring this is as much evidence for multiple stages as possible, because the bigger systems have more and more stages of mineralization, more pulses. It's like a bank account. The more times you deposit money in your bank account, the bigger your bank account is. And so that's how the ore deposit is. Sometimes you're depositing gold, sometimes you're depositing silver, sometimes it's lead or zinc, but what's happening is that bank account is growing because of each of those additions. And that's one of the things you have to sort out. Those individual spokes are not growing at the same time. They're growing sequentially. That's all related to the overall evolution of the system. So what we're seeing, and we saw especially this summer at the Waterpump Creek drilling, was massive evidence for massive amounts of fluid input, deposition of massive amounts of pyrite, base metal mineralization, and lots of silicification, with evidence for breaking and then remineralizing of that zone as the next pulse of fluids came along. Another breaking event, and the fancy name we use in geology is breccia, which is just Italian for broken rock. But that's what's happening. It's being mineralized, it's breaking, it's mineralizing again, it's breaking, and we're seeing, I would say, a minimum of 10 to 12 different stages of breaking and mineralization in this overall system. And so that's one of the major components that tells us there's something big there.
Do you have a good clue on where the source to Illinois Creek is? And do you think it is a porphyry?
Peter is really the expert in this, but it's I'll just summarize it and then let Peter fill in the details here. But the usually the center of magmatic systems are centered around a porphyry deposit, and those are usually copper, molybdenum, silver. In this case, they're usually higher temperature, and so in very simple terms, Illinois Creek has the gold and the silver, and it does have significant amount of copper. We're still working on the metallurgy, so we can't talk about recoveries, but there's a lot of 0.2 to 0.4% copper. So I think that shows that it's closer to the high temperature source. And then Peter's description will let him talk about the distal stages at Waterpump Creek. So I don't steal all your thunder, Peter, and maybe I'll just turn it over to you on the metal zoning.
Okay, so the way we understand these systems, as Kit mentioned, is there is a porphyry, which is the heat engine and the source of the fluids. It may or may not be a productive porphyry in the sense that it may or may not be well enough mineralized to make a mine, like a porphyry copper or porphyry moly mine, but it nonetheless is a mineralized porphyry, and that as that evolves, as it cools, it kicks off progressive packets of fluids. The zoning that we see with copper and gold at Illinois Creek, and then zinc becoming more prominent in the middle zone, and then silver, lead, and zinc dominating what we will call the most distal or the outboard parts of the system up at Waterpump Creek. That's a classic zoning pattern that we see in carbonate replacement deposits. Now, within each of those zones, we're going to see evidence for multiple stages of fluids moving through. Some pulses stronger than others, but all of those fluids are starting somewhere off on the left-hand side of this diagram and working their way through whatever the fluid pathways are, whatever the plumbing of this system is. They traverse the 6 kilometers or 8 kilometers of length of this system, and as those fluids cool and as they react with the rocks, they drop off different metals progressively. That's why you get the zoning that you see in this system. Those fluids also are, the fancy word is they're out of chemical equilibrium with the rocks. So basically what's happening is those fluids are chemically different from the rocks that they're passing through. So they alter those rocks around where it's dropping out the mineralization. So when you're done, you have this big alteration halo surrounding a core of the mineralization, which is what you're looking for. It's a little like when you see a small child on the street when it's 30 degrees below zero, and that child is bundled up in layers and layers and layers of clothing. So they've got their underwear on, and then they've got their regular clothes, and then they have a sweater, and then they have a jacket, and finally have this big poofy down jacket that's on the outside. So the child is what you're looking for, but to get to that child, you have to work your way through all of those different layers of alteration to get to unpack the child. And so what we're doing in parts of this system is we've discovered the poofy outer coat. Maybe we've found a hint of the sweater, and we're looking for pieces of the child within that system. So it's a bit of a strained analogy, but for people who aren't familiar with alteration, it's like that. It's like you're unpeeling an onion to get down to the core of it, which is the part that you really care about. And to me, the size of that poofy jacket and the sheer volume of alteration that we're seeing here is part of what tells us that there has to be strong mineralization threading its way from Illinois Creek out to Waterpump Creek. The difficult part is this post-mineral faulting that's moved things around, and I don't want to use the analogy of chopping up a child to make that pattern, but it is taking your puzzle and cutting it up in pieces and then moving it around and trying to fit those pieces back together. But what that means is that, especially if you look at the long section of Waterpump Creek, that three-dimensional view of Waterpump Creek, the resource, it's cut off very sharply at the right end, the southern end. That's because it comes right up against a fault. It is geologically unreasonable to think that fault was the end of the ore body. That mineralization used to continue straight across before that fault was there. Now we have to find which direction it was moved and where it is on the other side of the fault and follow that next segment till we get to the next fault and then do it again. And we might have to do it one more time after that. But the main point here is that the consistency of mineralization that we see at Waterpump Creek, the consistency of mineralization that we see at Illinois Creek, suggests that this was a once continuous, strong system. And, as Kit has mentioned a number of times, we don't have the benefit of exposure to work with. We're doing blind exploration using geochemistry and geophysics and drilling to try to track out this system. And in some places we're hitting what we're looking for. In other places, all we're hitting is alteration, but we're hitting so much alteration, it's telling us lots of fluids move through there. We just have to find the sweet spot of where the good stuff is.
Do you think is the porphyry or the potential porphyry in itself a target that you are looking for?
Potentially, it could be for a couple, and you want to find it for a couple of reasons. One, the most obvious, is that it might be well enough mineralized to stand on its own economically. As Kit mentioned, the Round Top is an obvious, well-mineralized porphyry, but that's not a development target for a junior company. It's a good exploration target, but developing a porphyry is very expensive. We want to know where the porphyry is for two reasons. One, if we can find one, it dramatically increases interest on the part of a major for getting involved in the project. the other is once you know where that porphyry is, that's your hub. And that gives you the ability to work the ends of the system against the middle, and it lets you work your way around that porphyry hub, looking for additional mineralized centers surrounding it. So it's very important to do that, and we've been trying to develop an exploration program with geophysics and geochemistry and what we know about this system to target that. We haven't yet had the treasury that would allow us to dedicate the drilling that's necessary to find it.
I mean, you have 350,000 ounces of gold, more or less at 1 gram per ton gold, and then you have some silver to that. What upside is there to the existing gold-silver resource in this pit area or Illinois Creek mine area?
Comment a little bit. There is, it's really open probably at both ends, and the reason is the drilling that was there was done to define a resource to start mining. It was really only mined, and it started, the development work is in 1996. The mining was in 1997, and then there was a little bit of mining during the reclamation in 2000. But after that, it was really just enough mining to put money into the bank account with the state and its operator to do reclamation. It was not to expand. So there really has been no drilling to expand the resource since the 1997 time period. And the drilling was very close spaced, called blast hole drilling, assayed only for gold and silver, a little bit for copper. And then when the mining stopped, everything stopped. There was really no exploration. So to the west, there's some very good gold grades. That there's a little small pit there that's shown, little outline that's called the West Pit. That's still the last set of drill holes had mineralization in them, and they have hasn't been explored to the west. To the east, there were a few holes on this diagram. It's called the East Icy Manto Oxide. That is a low-grade manto mineralization. It was probably not the economic mineralization that was mined, which is more likely slightly to the north along the Illinois Creek Fault. But very little exploration was done. We've drilled 2 or 3 holes south of the pit, one this year. A lot of work needs to be done, but it certainly could be expanded, not only just with redoing the block model and putting in some modern metal prices, but the goal would be is to bring this up to 1 million ounces minimum of gold equivalent, and I believe that would make it economic. It would really ultimately be developed in coordination with the high grade underground at Waterpump Creek, and hopefully an expansion of that. That's really the high margin mining and economic opportunity here. The value of the mineralization of Waterpump Creek is probably haven't recalculated lately, in the $700 US dollars a ton range, and the mining costs and G&A would be in the $150 to maybe $200 a ton. So huge margin. That type of deposit would provide a very quick payback, and underground is usually lower capital expenditures because you don't have all the infrastructure, and it very importantly would be a low environmental footprint. So that's sort of the big picture. What we find in the coming year or two in the middle here at Warm Springs and the LH zone would also add to that. I like Peter's analogy of the bank account. That sounds good. Depositing gold one year and silver and lead zinc in another.
Well, I think it's important to distinguish between resource drilling and discovery drilling. And clearly the Illinois Creek gold, silver with copper zone is a discovery. It was mined. They only mined 15% of it, but clearly it's there. It's real. It's a significant amount of gold at a good grade. To me, it's indicative of the strength of the system. The exploration drilling to find more of it, I think, is the point Kit is making, is that this thing is open in both directions along strike, and it's probably open to depth as well. So some discovery drilling needs to be done to carry it from the 300,000 ounces it has now to a million, and about 150 million of the difference is already in inferred, and that could be upgraded at some cost to get you halfway there to the million. But I think the strength of the mineralization, the shallowness of the drilling, and the fact that this thing is completely open to the west really indicates that there could be a lot more potential. It would not surprise me at all to learn that the source porphyry driving this system is a kilometer or more to the west of the Illinois Creek pit. So adding another kilometer to the section to the length of the system, maybe even two, would not be a stretch.
Let's talk about Waterpump Creek. We'll probably touch on Illinois Creek at a later stage. So you have 75 million ounces of silver equivalent, very high grades. How sensitive is the deposit to increase in the cutoff grade? Currently, you sit at 150 gram per ton silver equivalent.
The resource, I believe, was using a cutoff grade of 200 grams per ton, and that is the third paragraph from the bottom. So what is remarkable here is that when you have this high of a grade, it is very insensitive to cutoff. So if one were to look in our 43101 report or in the March announcement, March of 2024 of the initial resource, at 300 grams per ton, the tonnage really doesn't change at all. You have to get over 500 grams per ton cutoff before there's sort of a 1 or 2% decrease in the tonnage. And the tonnage doesn't drop off till you get closer to 550 to 600 grams per ton. So very insensitive, and that is just a key aspect of a very high grade deposit. And in this type of the geometry would allow it for what's called long hole stope underground mining. It's more of a modern technique, more mechanized, and that's probably what would be used here.
So in other words, the veins are quite thick if long hole stoping is a good method
Correct.
for it. Recovery rates assumed are quite are not very high, so there's probably a upside to that. What's the timeline on will you announce some metallurgical test works?
We are currently working with a lab in Denver, Forte Analytics, and metallurgist, his name is Deepak Malhotra, has been working on our project since actually we started at Round Top. Very world-renowned metallurgist. What we're looking at there is the different types of flotation and different things that can be done with the mineralogy to upgrade the recoveries. And silver is one thing we're just starting to do research. We know most of the silver is contained within the galena, but there is some silver that is not, and so we need to determine the type of silver metallurgy or mineralogy, which will then determine the best recovery techniques. So we're not going to, some of this is done during pre-feasibility and feasibility. We're just trying to do enough in the next 6 months or so that we can increase our recoveries for a resource, because right now it is pretty conservative.
In what directions is the deposit open?
For Waterpump Creek, it's we know it's open to the north. Whether or not the thicknesses continue, that's really what we'll discover with more drilling. I think the biggest key, and I'll go back to that one map that we were talking about that shows the offsetting faults. This just shows right there where the Waterpump Creek label is one of the post-mineral faults. So I think the key for next year's exploration is we will work this winter applying some detailed structural geology. This year, I didn't mention the state of Alaska and the U.S. Geological Survey. They funded a regional electromagnetics airborne program that we actually hosted. It was based out of our camp, and they paid a nice rental fee for that. We were just the southern tip of that survey, but we were able to work with the state of Alaska. They are very business-like partnership, so we were able to fund some very tight space drilling directly over our part of the deposit. That information is just being looked at now, and we don't think it will be a direct targeting for drilling, but it does show very detailed geology. And so my hope is that we will be able to use that and understand better the faulting offsets. And I think the key is to really look and analyze which way the geology was offset south of the existing Waterpump Creek resource, and that will be an excellent target going ahead. We've done some drilling there. We know we have a lot to learn, and hopefully with the EM program that was flown by the state and the USGS, will help us with that.
Maybe we could clarify here. So the extension, if the deposit, which probably does extend sort of south of the offsetting fault, would that be in the LH zone, or would it be sort of in between?
Well, we don't know the offset. I think the part of the key there is there's two dashed lines there in the LH area, and those show structures that appear in the geophysics, and we know that there's some mineralization on the surface just to the west of the airstrip. Is that what we're looking for, or is that just some leakage of mineralization up dip or along a structure? That may be likely also, but that would be the continuation. Should be substantial. The key is whether the source is say along the Warm Springs Fault, going back to Illinois Creek, or is it a northern structure that we're just starting to learn about? So, a lot to know. We need some additional drilling, and the more we can drill each summer, the faster we learn this.
If you're really going to grow the water pump deposit, do you have to find it south of the fault, or is sort of do you think the northern extension is not has the same potential to materially grow the tonnage? Maybe you, Peter, could add some to that.
Yeah, let Peter answer that, because it's really unknown.
Well, it is unknown, but when we compare to other big carbonate replacement systems, what we see is that mineralization gets more coherent, gets more regular, gets larger as you work your way back towards the source. So what we have found at Waterpump Creek is very high-grade mineralization. It's got a decent footprint, but that footprint should increase as you work your way back towards the source. So to me, the thing to do is not necessarily to look for that relatively small target that would be the immediate extension of the Waterpump Creek body, but would be to step back a little bit more towards the source, back into that LH zone, not necessarily the place we've worked before, but start with that parallel structure that Kip just mentioned. See if we can find strong mineralization there. And then what you do is you've established a series of points along your trend from Illinois Creek to Waterpump Creek, and you can grow each of those from those discovery points to the north and south within each of those fault zones. So that would be the way I would and have recommended moving forward with this, because the target should become bigger, and certainly the amount of alteration that we see as we work our way from Waterpump Creek back to the southwest, the amount of alteration is bigger, it's wider, it's stronger. It tells you that you've moved from that small child who was bundled up from their mittens up to their sleeve, where things are starting to get bigger. And what you're really wanting to find is the body of the child, which is still further down in that Illinois Creek area. As you're working from your finger to the wrist to the arm, working your way back up. And obviously an arm is a bigger target than a finger. So that's the analogy of why I would say work in that LH and then Warm Spring zones and work your way back toward Waterpump Creek rather than trying to follow Waterpump Creek to the south.
Makes sense. You don't want to have sort of be myopic about Waterpump Creek and just the smaller extensions. So let's talk about LH. You drilled 4 holes. You're looking for just to establish this. You're looking for a sulfide CRD deposit similar to Waterpump Creek.
Similar
Yeah,
but larger.
Or larger.
Okay.
Yeah, the surface geochemistry is much larger, but that again is a function of soils and slope. The reason that we were working at LH in 2005 and 6, Nova Gold drilled about 4 or 5, maybe 6 holes there. Started off very close to the soil anomalies, but the drilling was not wide spaced at all. But it did show it drilled into oxide mineralization very similar to the oxide mineralization that Anaconda discovered at Waterpump Creek. So they were mantos, and some of them pretty substantial in the 3 to 4 meter thickness range. Some decent grades, but it's oxidized, so usually the zinc is gone. And so the goal is to find the sulfide mineralization. We drilled down dip and hit some minor mineralization, but now it looks like the structure that controls LH is more vertical. We need to understand that more. The drilling has not yet been plotted in 3 dimensions, and we're getting the final assays from the LH drilling in last week and this week. So we're right at the stage now to put the geochemistry together, the structured 3D model, and then we can come up with drill targets for next year.
So to confirm 2 things. Firstly, so LH is still it's still a high priority target despite not hitting what you wanted this year.
Yeah, very much.
Correct. And number 2, if you could outline, what you will target next year, what you will have learned from this season, or will learn that you will be able to sort of better, with a better probability to find it next year.
LH is still a very good target. We know it's mineralized. We have not hit the thicknesses of sulfide mineralization that we would like to see. So if we need to understand the structural model, and if it is vertical, then we would come closer to the source on the surface and drill some steep angle holes. But we have to put the model together. It's still a very good target. How much drilling we will allocate between Warm Springs, LH, and other targets, we won't determine until the spring. And as we move through the analysis, that's when we start allocating the drill footage. But we will definitely go back to LH, but not until we have a better understanding.
But it will probably be drilled next year.
Yeah, this winter once we develop the 3-dimensional model, until all the assays are in, you can't plot the geochemistry in 3 dimensions. And that's one of the keys, is to establish a vector towards the mineralization.
This is actually pretty typical for what you do in blind exploration. And because you don't have the benefit of surface exposures that give you guidance for where to drill, you take your geologic model, you plug in whatever existing information you have, say from older drill holes. You create your model, you look at it in terms of the geophysics, all the information that you have, you drill some holes. Then you reiterate, you go back and you look at what those holes are telling you about your geologic model, about your geophysical model, about your geochemical model, and you go recapitulate all of those data, come up with new targets, and then that informs your drilling for the next year. And we're right at the end of drilling season, so we're just in the process of gathering the data, which we are then going to reintegrate with what we already know, and that will tell us about what we should do next. Now, that sounds like a slow process, and it's a process that requires long-term commitment. So what you're looking for in the meantime, even if you're not hitting the big mineralization that you'd like to hit, you're hitting large amounts of alteration. You're seeing the evidence that this is a multi-stage, multi-phase property that saw lots of different events going on, along that plumbing system. And that continues to give you the confidence that there's something big there. You have to keep looking for it. And that's what justifies going forward with the drilling for next year. So that's the same philosophy you carry through each component of this system. So Kit is in the enviable or unenviable position of having to do this same kind of recapitulation and reintegration of the data in 3 or 4 separate areas. So each one of them has their differences, but they're all showing us the signs that lots of fluids pump through this system, and there should be major concentrations of mineralization. We just have to find them. I should say, we have to find more of them, because we've already found at least 2 good zones of concentrated mineralization.
Let's not talk about Warm Springs, another spoke that you more or less have found. You drill 9 holes, 7 of these holes hit sort of target mineralization. 2 holes have been released, hole 4 and hole 5. Could you explain what you found in these holes and what you learned from them, so to say?
Sure. First, I should point out that the 4 drill holes shown on the far left, those are from the 1980s. So those are not ours. And it's a little confusing because there is a hole 11 and 12 on the left, and then we drilled 11 and 12. So we were changing the numbering system right in the center. So the little yellow star, that would be the Warm Springs breccia outcrop that's in Waterpump in Illinois Creek itself that Nate Brewer worked on, and he was in charge of drilling a couple holes there that did show that it went into a silica oxide breccia. So what we decided to do is a fairly large step off. You can see the 720 meter wide interval. We stepped off about 300 meters south of the 1980s discovery of the Warm Springs breccia. Drilled 2 angle holes. 4 is on the left, a little bit further north, and 5 is another angle hole that has a label. So 4 went through some very high grade but thin gold mineralization at the top of a massive pyrite zone. Hole 5 to the right went through that zone, but at the bottom of it, and shown in purple, it went into some significant silver-lead-zinc mineralization. Hole 5 was lost. The hole was lost due to drilling conditions while it was still in Gossan mineralization at the bottom. I think now maybe I'll just turn it over to Peter because he came out and was able to see the significant breccias, silica, and pyrite, and let him comment on those.
Well, so I'll back off a little bit and give what I see sort of at a very gross scale. So the material that you see in light blue, in other words, everything below that dashed red line, that's the carbonate host rock that is the C of CRD. The gray and blue and light green material above that are completely impermeable rocks. So they are a lid on the system. And when you look at the overall shape of the mineralization and alteration here, what you see is this broad triangular effect. So the apex of that triangle right down here, somewhere in that general area, and remember, look at the scale. That's 100 meters between those tick marks on the bottom. 100 meters is a long way, especially if you're looking for an ore body that's 50 meters wide, for example. You could miss it on 100-meter scale. But the overall shape is telling us somewhere at the apex of that triangle is where the feeder structure brought the fluids up, and they ponded against that impermeable rock on top, and so they spread out laterally underneath it. So that gives you this shape that reflects multiple pulses of fluids, which are different stages of fluids brought in silica, some of them brought in pyrite, some of them brought in gold, some of them brought in copper, some of them brought in lead, zinc, silver. So we're seeing multiple within this overall zone of strong mineralization and alteration. We're seeing multiple pulses, multiple breakage events, and the pumping of an enormous amount of fluid. If you look at the vertical distance from where it says the AUCU, the gold copper zone, down to the bottom of red, that's over 250 meters of massive silicification, massive pyrite, and narrow but very high grade zones of mineralization cutting through it. So this is telling us, and the geometry of the drilling that we see up dip to the left, where we see things getting thinner, although it does look like a significant piece of the system may have been eroded off of the surface. But as you move your way towards hole 6, and again, this is only informed by one hole, the system seems to be trailing off in that direction. So we have this corridor, which, give it its overall width, is probably 400 to 500 meters wide, centered on that feeder structure, where we're seeing multiple stages of mineralization and alteration. That's a major fluid conduit. That appears to be separate from the one that runs through the middle of the Illinois Creek mine, a little less than a kilometer to the north, but it suggests this is a separate spoke on the overall system. And when you look at the spacing between these drill holes in detail, you realize that there is room to move a very large mineralized zone between those holes, and we're just seeing little scraps of the edges of it. So to me, this is a very exciting target. We've got the right host rocks. We know we've got a feeder in there somewhere. We know we're seeing multiple stages of silicification, pyrite, and the minerals that we care about. It's a question of where is the big concentration of the minerals that we care about, and that's the next exploration. Another thing to point out is that holes 11 and 12, and I think maybe hole 9, were relatively shallow. They don't get down into this deep zone. So that intercept that you're talking about liking the looks of in hole 8, there's nothing between it and hole 4 as you work your way to the north, because the holes 11 and 12 don't get down that deep. We were shooting for the upper part of the system to try to understand it. The holes are designed so that we can get back into them. That's why Kit was mentioning the drill rig is going to spend the winter sitting right on top of that platform, and one of the first things we'll do next year is deepen hole 11 or 12 or another one like it in the area, to see what's actually there at depth in that zone, to see if that Silver-Lead-Zinc zone continues to the north, as I personally suspect it does.
Yeah, Jasper, I'd like to point out that this is a cross-section view. It really needs to be looked at in conjunction with the plan view looking down, because hole 12 is coming towards the viewer and hole 11 is going away from it. We decided from a drilling logistics standpoint to drill a fan, so they go to the northeast, the north, the northwest, and that gave us the ability to finish up at the end of the season, get as much information in 3 dimensions so we can plot it up later, but it's very difficult to see that in a strictly a cross-section view.
But so, I mean, are you looking for, it seems like you have a zonation here. Would you have a gold copper zone, which you have intersected in hole 4, and then you have what hopeful is, an analog to the Waterpump Creek deposit with the high-grade sulfide mineralization.
Yeah, really what's significantly different and new and exciting about Warm Springs is this is the very first time that we've hit significant gold and copper mineralization in our drilling. Over in the Illinois Creek mine itself, obviously there is, but in our exploration drilling, this is the first time, and these are the very first drill holes in Warm Springs ever drilled. So we've hit a upper gold and copper zone right below what's called the aquitard that Peter was talking about. That's the schist and the greenstone that's very impermeable. And 200 meters down, we have a potential silver-lead-zinc zone that we know we hit. It has the potential to extend. We don't know which direction it goes, and that's something we'll be definitely be working on next year.
But one of the things that the textures show you when you work your way through these drill holes is that you shouldn't be thinking about the gold and copper as having a zoning relationship to the silver-lead-zinc, that they represent different pulses of fluids coming through that system. So they are close in space now, but they were not close in time at the time they were in place. So it's different pulses of the system. And one of the real key factors that we see in this whole Warm Springs area is how many different pulses and how many different deformation events or brecciation breakage events occurred along this zone. So we're looking at a pathway that saw multiple stages of fluids moving along it. So don't just think of it as a simple zoning gold, copper to silver. These are, if there's a lead zinc silver zone related to that gold copper zone, it's further to the northeast towards Waterpump Creek. And the copper gold zone related to the lead zinc silver zone here is back to the southwest, back towards along the axis of the Illinois Creek somewhere. So very different pulses. So there's a couple of things that this section illustrates very nicely in what Kit just mentioned in terms of now being able to think about what the results of this mean once we have the assays. One of the things that you see in these holes is massive amounts of silicification and massive amounts of pyrite. Silicification should be extremely resistive to certain geophysical techniques. Pyrite should be very conductive to certain geophysical techniques that we've already run on the property. So one of the first things we have to do, now that we've seen how much potentially conductive and resistive rocks are in this area, is to revisit the geophysics with the ground truth of knowing what we actually cut here and having the geophysicists plug those realities of very resistive or very conductive rocks into their models and take another look at interpreting the geophysics to potentially say, okay, we can see this body, or no, we can't, or we can see something that's next to it that's actually more attractive than what's been drilled already. So that's what I'm really looking forward to seeing coming out of the reiteration of all of the existing information for this area. And Alaska being Alaska, we get a nice long winter to do that in.
One final question on Warm Springs. So the alteration and mineralization zone is 10 times larger here than at Waterpump Creek. How do you measure that? What kind of alteration is it? And also, what correlation is there between sort of alteration size and actual sort of deposit size?
Well, the first thing you hope is that mineralization is proportional to the amount of alteration. So the more alteration you see, the more mineralization is potentially there. That is the optimism that an exploration geologist has to carry into something like this. And it's borne out by the things we see in a lot of other systems. So I'm very optimistic about what this volume of alteration is telling us. Not just the volume, but how many different altering and mineralization stages, how many pulses of fluids move through this. This is telling us this was a major fluid channelway, and we've found part of it, but we need to understand where the sweet spot is in it, because somewhere in this, everything by analogy tells us that there should be big mineralization.
Now we have to speak about what the next steps for the project. So say next year, say that your cost of capital, it goes down a bit. So you have a lower cost of capital. Maybe you have a market cap of 35 to 40 million Canadian to next rate before the next race. How will you be thinking around raising capital? Assuming you will do it in the next couple of months.
Well, we definitely will want to raise additional capital to fund the 2025 program. We designed our budget, and the board was quite conservative this year to, I would have loved to keep drilling, and we've done that in the past, but then you end up depleting the treasury at the end of the year, and that's never a good idea. So we will have keep the treasury in good shape, but we will need to raise additional capital. Once we finish our analysis, we'll design a program. This year we designed a 4,000 meter program. I would really like to have at least 6,000 meters, and 8,000 would be better than that. Cost of capital will be determined by the markets. That's one thing that we certainly learned, that don't try to predict what's going to happen, though I'm encouraged with seeing silver prices up around getting close to $32 an ounce, and gold actually touched $2,700 briefly in the last few days. So that's encouraging, but we'll just have to go through and look at that. We don't have exact dates, and we just know that sometime we will be raising additional capital as we go ahead. And that's just part of the business. We have shown, and if you look at the stock charts back in 2022, that when we have good intercepts and make new discoveries, it really does affect the stock price quite dramatically. So we hope to be in that position again as we go ahead.
Let's assume that you will drill 6,000 meters. How do you think you will allocate that?
Well, Jasper, you'd have to maybe come to the next technical meeting in Tucson that we'll have here in a few months and help design that. And
maybe you could just give a preliminary thinking on what targets you will test.
We have 2 drill rigs we operated last year, one at Warm Springs and the other was up at the LH zone. So we have the ability to drill both targets at the same time. We definitely will start off at LH, re-enter holes 11 and 12 that we decided, instead of drilling one deep one, to drill 2 shallow, but we leave the casing in place. It's all engineered to do this, and we've done it in the past. We'll just come back, re-enter, deepen those holes. That'll tell us quickly which way we want to go, and then we'll be developing drill pads at Warm Springs, and I would guess we would have at least say 50% of our drilling at the Warm Springs target, maybe a little more. If the structural interpretation works out for LH, we'll drill there again. What I would really like to see is a combination of geology, geophysics, and structure to figure out where we're going to go south of the Waterpump Creek resource across the faulting. That's really the best potential. It's a blind target right now. So that's one we really want to think about, and that would be a great way to tap into the Waterpump Creek extension to the south.
And I'm going to be at that meeting thumping the table to continue a certain amount of district scale, more greenfields exploration. So we should be able to take the geophysical signals that we see coming off of Warm Springs, for example, and back off and look around the district to see where else we see something that looks like that. Because there could be another, or there should be one or more additional spokes to this system. And so the potential upside of putting a single or 2 drill holes into a totally new target that hasn't been tested before is potentially a game changer and potentially opens up our thinking on the system. On the same basis, I'm going to push for drilling some holes to the west along the Illinois Creek corridor. Maybe try to push that thing a half kilometer or a kilometer more to the southwest. The point here isn't necessarily to be specific about where they're going, but to keep that district scale mentality so that you don't get too stuck on any particular target too soon, so that you do some drilling on those to bring them forward, but you continue to do drilling around the district to try to continue to improve your overall understanding. Because as much as we like this corridor, these corridors that we're working on now, we don't know yet whether they're the best ones in the system. The system is telling us it pumped a lot of fluids, but there could be parts of the system that we simply haven't thought about in the right way yet. And the new information that will come from the results from this year might influence where we drill other places around the district. So I'm going to be, as always, telling people, keep your options open, keep focusing on the blue sky as well as the things that you know.
How does the permitting process work in Alaska, particularly on state land?
The short answer to that, it works very well, and it's a very nice system. So the state of Alaska, when you're on state lands, will, very unusual when you look at the U.S. federal lands, Forest Service and BLM, which we don't have to deal with. So the state will give us a 5-year exploration permit. We just renewed our permitting, and so 2024 was the first year of our current 5-year program. So it's a 5-year program. We identify water sites, general areas of exploration, and then at the end of each year, we file a reclamation report, summary report in December that tells the state actually where the drill holes, where the actual drill holes are, what trenching we did, and then we do that each year. So we're permitted for another 4 years of drilling without going back to the state of Alaska. So it's very good for planning. We basically report back what we've done. If we go over a certain amount of acres of disturbance, then we post a little bond for that. And then we also reclaim as we go ahead. Every year we reclaim part of what we did the previous year. And it's a very good system, very well managed, and we work closely with our regulators, state offices based in Fairbanks, and they come out to visit whenever they want to. So it's a very good program. So we have 4 years left under our current exploration program, then we'll renew it again. We're in the third 5-year exploration program now.
Could you add some color, if you want, on how the permitting works, if you want to take it into production or through the development phase, rather?
Well, that is different. You come up with a mine plan and a plan of operations, so that's very different than exploration. We are doing de-risking studies as we go ahead. We've been doing water quality. We work with the Alaska Fish and Game. We're in the 5th year of fish habitat studies, and the way the state works it, they have an excellent, very scientific fish and game department, and they actually come out and do the aquatic studies. So we have a unique relationship with the state. It's called the Large Mine Permit Team, and any agency that would be associated with a type of permit comes together once a year. We discuss what we're going to do, and we actually have a contract with them and then pay a portion of their overhead, and that keeps the groups working closely together. So we're doing fish habitat, different water quality studies, cultural resources. All that has been done along the route corridor to the Yukon River. And then because this was a past producing mine, there's an entire data permit set, and the state of Alaska has given us a copy of that. So it includes everything from pit slope stability, rock quality, geohydrology. It's a $1990 was probably a $10 million permit study, and we have all that data. So very, very, very complete.
You have 2 resources, of which one is a fantastic one, but it's a little bit too small. So you probably need another discovery to really sort of be an attractive takeover target. What kind of companies are so far showing interest in Western Alaska?
Well, we can't name the companies, but over the past couple of years, we have at least, I think, 5 different confidentiality agreements with both majors and mid-tiers, and I think almost all of them have done site visits. over the past couple of years. Waterpump Creek is a very high-grade resource. Going into production depends on the company, but there is a sort of a rule of thumb in the mid-tiers that if you have 120 million ounces of silver equivalent, that would give you a 10 million ounce per year production. That would be a 12-year mine life. That, I think, is a good threshold for most operating companies. They all have their different perspective. Silvercrest was quite a bit smaller than that, probably in the 60 million ounce range. They're a reserve, we're a resource, so they're apples and oranges there. But that's an example. Adriatic, their deposit in, I believe in Croatia, went in production slightly about twice as big as Waterpump Creek, and it's a polymetallic, so it's actually a good example. But if we were able to double the size of Waterpump Creek, which that resource took 2 years of drilling once it was discovered, and I think that would be a very good economic threshold. But I'm not the operating company, I'm the explorer.
Where do you envision Western Alaska Minerals in 3 years? And both of you can answer this if you want.
It depends on the drilling success and how much we fund, but I would say in 3 years, we hopefully will have developed a resource at Warm Springs and extended the Waterpump Creek to the south. And as Peter said, if we can drill a long strike at the Illinois Creek Zone with enough funding, if we could, double that 525,000 ounces of gold equivalent, hit 1 million, that would be a nice oxide deposit. So that's where I'd like to be in 3 years, and signing the papers, handing it over to a good operator.
I'm not sure I can elaborate on that a whole lot. I'd like to see within 3 years at least 2 more discovery zones on the property in addition to the ones that have already been found, because I think that the district has the potential for significant additional spokes to the system. So I'd like to see the exploration continue with the focus of unlocking understanding of the entire system, because not only is that going to find us a lot more mineralization and do good things for our share price, but it will also mean that when that operator that Kit referred to comes in, that they're going to pay very handsomely, because the system will be substantially larger than it looks to be right now.